pretty good.
Quit crunching my head.
All right, I saved this piece for your return, John Cass, as a cultural maven. This is the David Gelettner piece from the Wall Street Journal last week that many in conservative circles were bouncing about. And he writes, among other things, many intellectuals think Mr. Trump is vulgar. That includes conservatives.
Me too.
They think he's a peasant and talks like one. It never dawns on them that the president can't stand them any more than they can stand him. Yet they expect him to treat them with respectful courtesy if he ever runs into them, as he should, and on the whole does. Conceivably, they should treat him the same way. He goes on. Conservatives regret the collapse of authority, dignity, and a certain due formality in the way Americans treat each other, but it's not clear that commentators make things any better when they treat the president himself like a third-rate clown. Conservative thinkers should recall they helped create President Trump. They never blasted President Obama as he deserved. Mr. Obama's policies punished the economy and made the country and its international standing worse year by year. His patronizing arrogance drove people crazy. He was the perfect embodiment of a one-term president. The Tea Party outbreak of 09-10 made it clear where he was headed. History will record that the press saved him. Naturally, the mainstream press loved him, but too many conservative commentators never felt equal to taking him on. I think that's true, and don't forget, that was from the outset when George Will and Charles Krauthammer, the sainted Will and Krauthammer, when they had dinner, broke bread with Obama in 2008.
To explain to him how things work. And that was at the time when the National Review, when they were still mocking Buckley. Buckley was rolling in his grave. I think he was already passed, I hope.
Yes.
But they were starting to mock Buckley, and basically it was like, let's play a game. Let's pretend to be conservatives. Let's not really challenge. Let's just be the guardians at the right gate. And then the Washington Post could be the guardians of the left gate, but the gate to the establishment.
Well, and Will and Krauthammer both signal that Barack Obama was a new kind of Democrat, a different kind of Democrat. And it gave, speaking of William F. Buckley, Christopher Buckley cover to endorse and openly support President Obama against McCain in 2008. Gelettner goes on in his piece. Some conservatives have the impression that by showing off their anti-Trump hostility, they'll get the networks and the New York Times to like them. It doesn't work like that. Although the right reads the left rarely reads the right.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, I think he's onto something. Why should it when the left owns American culture? Nearly every university, newspaper, TV network, Hollywood studio, publisher, education school, and museum in the nation. The left wrapped up the culture war 2 generations ago. Throughout my own adult lifetime, the right has never made one significant move against the liberal culture machine. Let me repeat that statement. Throughout my adult life, the right has never made one significant move against the liberal culture machine. So go ahead, proclaim it from the rooftops. The anti-Trump opposition is a virtual French resistance. If we're not going to fight anyway, let's surrender and get it over with.
Was he born before or after President Reagan took office?
No, he's Gelettner's, I think, in his 50s.
All right, so he doesn't consider that to be a victory?
Cultural.
Yes.
Was there a culture? I mean, there was a bit of a cultural renaissance, but in terms of where we are in the course of it, let's say the last 50 years, whatever gains we made in Reagan, have they been?
You go back.
Have they been lost?
Find the time machine. Go back in time. Find Rousseau and strangle him in his crib.
Well,
okay.
Okay. Well, okay.
But you can't do that.
Yeah. All right. Back to the Future. For more on this topic, no one better situated to opine on this and address this with us than our friend Andrew Klavan, a famed writer in his own right. He is a Hollywood screenwriter who wrote, the novel True Crime, as well as the adaptation for the Clint Eastwood movie. He's also the author of an excellent book, his latest, The Great Good Thing, A Secular Jew Comes to Faith in Christ. Andrew, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
It's nice to be here. Thanks a lot.
So what about the Gelettner piece and the argument that he makes?
Well, I agree with 2/3 of the Gelettner piece, but let me start with the part I thoroughly disagree with,
okay,
which is that the right failed to attack Obama. You're right that Krauthammer and Will gave Obama a chance when he first came in. Obama fooled a lot of people with his centrist talk, including my friend David Horowitz, who thought he was just going to be another Clinton Democrat. when he came in. Once the right sniffed out who this guy was, we went at him hammer and tongs, and Krauthammer leading the pack. Krauthammer used to just rip him every night on the Bret Baier show. You know, not only did the right fight against Obama, but was pretty successful when you consider that during Obama's 8 years in office, the Democrats lost something like 1,000 seats in governments across the country. So that's the part I think was wrong. It is not the right has made mistakes, but really it was the Republican Party who threw a lame duck like John McCain out there, and Mitt Romney, who is a good man, but who authored a health care bill so much like the health care bill that was the big issue that year that he was doomed to failure. I think the Republican Party failed to unseat Obama, not the intellectual right, which fought him very hard.
But I mean, just to develop this a little bit more, I think Gelettner's point is not necessarily about opposing Obamacare, opposing tax increases, his feckless leading from behind foreign policy. That's all true. American culture. Did we make any progress in American culture? And even with those bad candidates, and those losses suffered under Obama by the rest of the Democrat Party, and what's left of it now a super minority party. But where has culture moved in that time? It hasn't moved right.
This is the part where he's absolutely right. I mean, this is the thing that I feel like a kind of Cassandra, because I've been yelling and screaming about this for 10, 15 years. It is very hard to get conservatives to pay attention to the culture as anything but a means of propaganda. They don't understand that to make art, you have to make art first, and include the ideas as just part of that art, not as the whole point of it. And they don't understand what the arts do. They don't understand how the culture works. They're waking up a little bit. This is changing. A new generation of conservatives, when you go on colleges, it's the conservatives who are funny. When you go online, on Twitter, it's the conservatives who are hilarious, who understand how to use social media. A new generation is coming up, so I actually have some hope for the first time in a long time. But really, for 50 or 60 years, the left has seized Hollywood, academia, and the news media, and has used those things to spread a point of view which essentially says to people, there is leftism and there's hate. There is Black Lives Matter and there's racism. There is radical feminism and there's anti-female, an anti-female attitude. They have spread this idea that every idea but theirs is somehow radically hateful, racist, sexist, the whole lot. And we've let them do that.
How so, though? How so, Andrew? By allowing them to shame young people.
Yep.
At the same time, we're not providing alternatives that you suggested. Art that can offer them.
Not only by allowing them to shame young people, but by showing the cool folks, the celebrities, the guys who get all the girls and get all the money, by showing them to be a part of this system, by even rephrasing the language so it condemns things. So, for instance, the fact that men like to look at women becomes sexual objectification. You're objectifying a woman if you like to look at a woman, which is what makes the world go round. The fact that they will say, racial profiling to describe ordinary police work, this stuff that the police have to do in order to keep us safe, and they call it racial profiling. They've even infected the language that we use and the language all reporters now use to define the actions that we take in the world. And I think that we haven't been shrewd enough, and we haven't been, incisive enough to catch them at this at every step.
And we haven't been courageous enough.
I think we just maybe that's true. I don't know, but I do think we haven't been smart enough to stand up to them everywhere, to say we're not going to use the phrase racial profiling. It's a lying phrase. We're not going to say sexual objectification. We're not going to call a man who dresses up as a woman. We're not going to call him she, because he's not a she. He's not a woman. And these little things infect the language. When this is what the Soviets tried to do. When you only allow certain words, you're essentially only allowing certain thoughts.
Yeah.
And this idea that when people ask, is this feminist? They never ask, is feminism good? Maybe feminism is bad. I mean, certainly we all agree that women should have equal rights to men. They do have equal rights to men. There's no right that a man has in America that a woman doesn't have. But when you say feminism as if that was a positive thing, we should challenge that everywhere. I think feminism is a poisonous, toxic idea that has turned men and women miserable and turned them against each other in ways that are completely unnecessary.
Well, right. I mean, what it was it Emerson who said, first the language is corrupted and then man is corrupted, and that's where we're at. I will point you to some research we talked about earlier in the show that's just out from Pew that finds 50. I find this statistic jarring. I don't know about you, Andrew. You're an educated man. 58% of Republicans or independents who lean Republican see colleges and universities as a negative in America today. I think that is a jarring number, and it's not being a Luddite. It's not being anti-intellectual. It's a comment on the culture on campuses, clearly. And so what should be done about that other than what they're doing at University of Missouri, which is leaving?
Leaving, right. And it's not, you're absolutely right. It is not anti-intellectual because there's nothing intellectual about what used to be called the liberal arts. Now it's simply leftist propaganda. Last week, President Trump got up and he made a speech about defending Western civilization. And the left said, oh, Western civilization, that's a code word for racism. Meanwhile, leftist activist Muslim Linda Sarster got up and called for jihad against Donald Trump. And the left said, oh, jihad, that's just a phrase meaning spiritual struggle. That kind of knuckleheadness, can only come. You can only get that from an education. If Western civilization is racism, but jihad is intellectual struggle. That's what kids are being taught, and I've seen them. Basically, in colleges, our children are being stripped of their inheritance, which is the inheritance of Western culture, the culture that made them free, that made them able to think and speak as they wish. They're being taught not Plato, not Shakespeare, not Thomas Jefferson. They're being taught what their professors think of Plato, Shakespeare, and Thomas Jefferson, which is always skewed to the left toward this kind of critical theory that destroys everything the West stands for without replacing it with anything except the slavery of socialism. And yes, these kids come out more ignorant than when they went in, if that were possible.
Why is art, you mentioned earlier in our discussion that conservatives treat art as if, or the right treats art as if it's propaganda. Where is the great conservative, if there is such a thing, art in our culture now? And where is it? Is it dormant? Is it out there? We're not finding it? I'm not just talking about painting or visual medium, but I mean cinema, for example, music, literature. Where do you see it?
It tends to come out in costume drama. For instance, if you look at the Dark Knight trilogy by Christopher Nolan, very, very conservative work of art. But if you took the mask off Batman and you realized that he was George W. Bush, no one would go to the movie. They'd have ripped it apart. You see movies like Toy Story 3, which actually, though a cartoon, I thought was one of the best movies of the last 20 years. A deeply conservative attack on the nanny state.
Incredibles.
But what the left is so good at doing is rewriting history. And they will make a story about Valerie Plame as if she were some kind of hero. Of course, the greatest example of this is this idea that John F. Kennedy was killed by some kind of right-wing conspiracy when he was an anti-communist shot by a communist. That whole thing, that's 50 years of meddling with the culture with a conspiracy theory that makes absolutely no sense and is based on a series of unfactual errors. This is what they're very good at. They're good at openly rewriting history. And yet it never occurs to us to make stories that are openly conservative in the sense that they say, I thought American Sniper was the great work of conservative art in the last few years, Clint Eastwood's film. Wonderful movie, really a great movie. It wasn't jingoistic. It didn't say America was perfect. It didn't say war was good. It said that, these are the bad guys. We have to kill them. And when the sniper, at the end of it says, I'm ready to go before God and answer for every time I pulled the trigger, that's the way America should feel about its operations in the Middle East. And I think that these things do exist. And what the right has failed to do, it has failed to build the infrastructure that artists need. Artists work for love. I mean, I know this. I've been a novelist most of my life. They work for money, sure, like all of us, but they also work for love. There's no award given by conservatives to artists. There is no review venue where an artist can go and get a good review that will reach the people. The people who control the culture in New York Times, which is barely even a newspaper anymore.
Right.
It's really just a sophomoric leftist rag, and their reviews count for instance, in theater, in dance, and all those kind of things that upper-class New Yorkers like. We haven't built an infrastructure to support the arts. There are no grants for conservative
Or they've
art.
the left has hijacked the foundations.
Exactly.
Right? And then they've used that for their propaganda. I'd suggest if they remake a movie like Harrison Bergeron or something like that, where you have, people with talent who are weighed down, like the great dancer has to wear a weight around her ankles and so forth. Something like this, you have to have something that, I agree with you, that's not overtly like didactic, but something that...
Or The Fountainhead. Remake The Fountainhead. No, it's,
But they did.
You could play Gary Cooper's role as Howard Rourke.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I think it was ESPN who called on Tom Brady. I mean, this is part of the culture, too. Our sport called on Tom Brady to explain himself, explain his friendship to Donald Trump. They really are running this kind of ad hoc Soviet show trial for anyone who disagrees. And any artist, I can tell you this, I've worked in Hollywood. We saw it with... I forgot her name now, one of the Australian actress, but Nicole Kidman, she came up and said, no matter what we think, all of us should support the president. That's what she said. She didn't say we had to agree with him. She just said we should all get behind the president after Trump was elected. She had to apologize. Everybody in Hollywood knows that their job is on the line. If they're caught out being a Trump supporter, everyone knows that they can say anything they want about Donald Trump without really suffering. Maybe holding up an image of his bloodied head will get you fired from CNN, maybe. But really, if you are accepting an award, if you're accepting an Oscar, you can stand up and say anything you want about middle America and not suffer, even though you're insulting half the audience base. That's how far more dedicated they are to their belief system than to even profits. Everybody says Hollywood is all about money. It's untrue. Hollywood is about ideology. They're going to make their money no matter what, because they can make it overseas. They can make it in a million different ways. But if you stand up at the Oscars and say, you know what, Trump's doing a pretty good job, and thank you for this award, and sit down, that'll be a scandal, a literal scandal for days, maybe weeks, might cost you your career, might cause you never to be hired again. That's the kind of iron grip they have. And it's not an iron grip on ideas. They don't have any ideas. It's not an iron grip on quality art. Most of the quality art has been, in some sense, conservative. It's an iron grip on the industry, on the industry of making movies, on the industry of publishing books, on the industries of doing TV. All of that stuff is very tough to get into and get through if you are openly Republican or conservative.
All right, a man who will not be nominated for an Oscar anytime soon. He is Andrew Klavan, screenwriter, essayist, and author of The Great Good Thing, A Secular Jew Comes to Faith in Christ. Andrew, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
And he joined us on the turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're